properties that are in the worst condition, it is something that can be very scary.
Properties down to the studs.
Selling for just under $3 million.
Today, he's going to break down the fix and flip process.
It's really easy to spot a bad flip. The spreads are massive there.
So you can ensure that your margins are protected before you ever even write an offer.
When it is completed, it's a nice, beautiful, almost brand new home.
Where then are you locating these properties?
The $3 million buyer still exists. Pure money that's going down the drain at that time, but just you have to know in the back of your head. I think this is kind of like a golden age right now. Profit is made on the buy side.
Welcome back to another episode of the SCI Mortgage Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Marks, and today we have a very special guest joining us. Brad Hansen from Energy Realty is ranked as one of the top agents in the Los Angeles market and nationally. Brad specializes in sourcing, evaluating, and executing profitable fix and flip projects. Today, he's going to break down the fix and flip process from finding the right property, evaluating the rehab, and running the numbers so you can ensure that your margins are protected before you ever even write an offer. So whether this is your first flip or you're an experienced investor, this episode is packed with the systems Brad uses to find the deals that actually pencil out. Brad, welcome to the show, brother. Thank you for joining us today.
And my pleasure, man. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to chatting with you this morning.
Yeah, this is great. For those listening, Brad and I go back a little ways here. We've been fortunate enough to work together, as a lender that he works with to help facilitate his clients. He does work on traditional buys and sells. The reason why I wanted you to come on today is because, this is such a great space and you found a lot of success in this space. And more importantly, what I would consider more of a difficult market. In California, much higher ticket prices, there's more risk involved. So whether you're doing this in California or nationally, it's worth mentioning that the average home that you're purchasing and the average cost, that you're investing into the rehabs, you are there on more of the riskier side in that regard. But because of the systems and things that you've put together, you've made some pretty incredible profits. So we welcome you being on, and we're excited to kind of hear you unpack some of these great things that you've put in your toolbox as far as how to successfully find this.
Yeah, I mean, just to touch on kind of what you just said, the last few years in real estate specifically, as rates have gone up, from 3% to 6+, it's definitely been a tougher market from that standpoint. That being said, what I've found is that with the tougher markets, it does create a bit of an opportunity for someone like myself to come in and kind of establish themselves and, kind of cherry pick the properties that I want to go after. As far as, what I'm looking for or how I'm identifying these properties, first and foremost, when I go into these flips nowadays, varying degrees of success with other deals that I've done in the past. But what I've found is that properties that are in the worst condition, the better, the more I like it. Because when I, targeting a property or what I'm looking to do with it, I prefer to just be able to do everything so that when it is completed, it's a nice, beautiful, almost brand new home is what it'll feel like. And I know when I'm going to sell it, I'm going to have very few issues, if any whatsoever. When that new buyer comes in and starts to do their inspections and things like that, I can confidently say, I've done the roof, I've done all the plumbing, I've done the electrical, new windows, new flooring, everything. And it's really not anything that I kind of have to hide or paper over anything. Being in the market, and prior to myself doing flips, I would, walk properties all the time, mostly, flips that were on the market and things like that. And you see all different levels of quality of work. It's really easy to spot a bad flip or to kind of take a look at stuff where they cut corners here and there. And it would always be something that I would look out for when I had a client, or a buyer looking at a potential property. Just to pick out the red flags of things that were either missed or papered over or hidden or whatever it may be. And I knew myself, knowing that I wanted to get into flips, that's never the type of, work that I wanted to do or put my name on it by any means. And more so than anything else, I tell this to people all the time, I want to be able to sleep at night. So when I sell a property, I want to feel good about the new buyers going into it, feeling like they, like I said, have like a brand new house. They're not going to have any issues for ideally the next 5, 10, 20 years if they stay there that long.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about some of those things. Are there common ones that you look for? You said, where maybe somebody's not doing as quality work as you are. And like, for example, we had a client one time where they literally spray painted the roof, right? Like it was that bad. They took this 40-year-old roof, went up there with spray paint, made it one color. It was found, fortunately, in the home inspection. But aside from something, that awful, are there specific items that you kind of look for to make sure that they did the quality work and they're not just, as they say, like slapping lipstick on it so it may look great, but then once you start poking around, you're seeing all the problems?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned the roof. That's one thing I've seen many times over. Every now and again, I'll get a property that, the house itself is in complete need of a major cosmetic remodel. But surprisingly enough, sometimes the sellers have done the bones of the house. So they've updated the electrical panel. They put on a new roof in the last 5 years. And those are the one-offs where I'll look at it and say like, okay, this roof is actually something that we don't have. Very rarely do we see that though for the properties that I'm targeting. Some other things though to look at. So easy ones, electrical panels. Majority of the time, those are original or very much outdated. Talking about, a modern home, more times than not, it's going to need minimally a 200 amp electrical panel. And, a lot of these homes that I'm buying for the flips are 40s, 50s, even older than that. And if their panel hasn't been updated anytime recently, then that's one thing for certain that we can pick out. We can look at the plumbing and see if that's been updated. A lot of times that'll just get, again, something that they'll try to fudge on it. Windows is a big thing. If they have 20-year-old vinyl windows, to me, some people would say they look at that and they say these windows are good enough. I prefer not to do that. The windows, they can be a huge expense, but again, if you're trying to do a property or a project and do it right, it's in your best interest as the future seller for the return on investment to go ahead and just do everything. Mm-hmm. So to me, target the houses that are in need of everything. There's not really a question on whether or not you're going to keep the roof, keep the windows, whatever it may be. You knew going into it, it's in your budget, it's in your head that you're going to replace everything.
Okay, so definitely you go above and beyond. It sounds like, and again, I've seen firsthand too, you're essentially bringing, the majority of these properties down to the studs and building them from the ground up. So that way, aside from just feeling confident, the client's not going to have any issues or the new buyer's not going to have any issues and you can sleep at night, but you do a beautiful job once you see these before and after. So if we look at it from your approach, where when you're trying to identify a property, you want to look at, I need to do all the work. So the worse, the better is kind of the recipe for your approach. So if that's your approach, where then are you locating these properties in the majority? Are you just using what's actually listed? Are you, using your network of people? Could you kind of take us through like more often than not, or the ways that you're actually identifying these, potential good properties that could be a fix and flip?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say the first 4 or 5 projects that I did, I was strictly buying them directly off the MLS. So the property was listed on the market, whether or not it had been sitting for a little bit or whatever it might be, I was strictly buying, on market. The reason being for that is I felt like, there's always an opportunity. For the longest time, I think I heard from a lot of other guys that were doing flips or agents in the business or things like that, that in order for you to find a flip that could be profitable, you would have to almost exclusively buy it off market or get some sort of smoke and deal on it. I think in today's market with the technology out there and things like that, the majority of sellers or people, in the know, kind of have a sense of what their home is worth. And in order for you to find a flip or a project that is, potential for profit, you just have to understand that you're not necessarily going to get like a quote unquote unbelievable deal, but you just have to know your numbers kind of inside and out and realize everything that needs to go into it in order to actually make it a profitable flip. So I had no problem buying off of the MLS. That being said, once I got further and further into this and I started to pick up more and more projects, 2 things did happen. All of the, local agents that I work with and other fellow realtors kind of started to see what I was doing and they would start sending me things. So whether it was something that was going to be coming on the market or pre-market or whatever it might be, it kind of opened up my network from that standpoint because people start to get to know what you're doing. You have a reputation for it. You are trustworthy, so they know that you're solid and things like that. And more opportunities kind of just start to come across your plate. But what I've been doing more recently, and this is it's really just a factor of a couple of different things, developing really good relationships with wholesalers. Mm-hmm. The reason being for that is I've gotten so busy with the projects that I do have that I don't have as much time to kind of comb the MLS and search for the deals and go find them out. What I like about working with the wholesalers is you kind of establish the criteria of what you're looking for and you make it very specific. And I have a couple, that I trust kind of inside and out where, the wholesalers in general can get a bad name. A lot of times they're the ones that are kind of, making all the phone calls, the text messages, the mailers, whatever it may be, to find these kind of distressed properties. And some of them out there are a little bit seedier, I guess you could say, than others, where they're trying to take advantage of people that are in distressful situations and, make a huge amount of money for just essentially being the broker. The ones that I work with essentially work on like a commission structure, like a traditional agent would. They make 20, 30, 40, 50 grand on a deal, but they leave enough, potential profit in there for me to come in afterwards, do all my work and realize the actual like net benefits of it.
Okay. So explain for those listening, how does somebody go about identifying like where to find a wholesaler so they can be part of this network or essentially have access to these properties that they're just looking to wholesale, where for those listening, essentially this other party has found the property, they haven't done any work on it, and they're essentially going to act as the middleman to take a small piece of the profit and then sell that property to someone like Brad, where then he will in turn do all the renovations and bring it up to what the fair market value is or what the after renovation value is. That way he can identify and determine what his profit margin is. So to your point, I guess two questions, how would somebody go about identifying where to find a wholesaler? And then secondly, what's kind of a good rule of thumb? Like how much should that wholesaler actually make on that deal? Is it a percentage? Because you don't want to, it could be a great deal, but once that wholesaler takes their piece of the pie, that may be 15 or 20% of your profit margin, depending on how, large of a initial purchase price that is. Is that a good point to make?
Yeah, so I always consider that. And then one thing, I tell all the wholesalers, especially because of the fact that I am an agent, and a lot of times what these wholesalers will do is they'll get properties that are on the MLS already and try to get them under contract at a discounted rate from where they're at already listed. I always tell the wholesalers that, don't send me anything that's on the market because I can go negotiate that myself. So that's my first and foremost. So I say anything that you have off market. And then I kind of try to, depending on the price that they send it into me at, I can kind of guess, because a lot of times they won't tell you what they have it under contract for, how much money they're making on a deal. And then obviously you have to kind of trust your own numbers and see like, okay, what's the potential profit? And if there's still enough, quote unquote, meat left on the bone for me to come in afterwards. So to me, I look at the wholesalers as essentially just another real estate agent that's making their 2.5% commission on it. And if that's the line where I can kind of see them, getting, I have no problem with that because they're bringing the deal to me. They kind of did all the legwork. They essentially are operating as the buyer's agent. They deserve their piece of the commission.
Yeah. Okay.
And if the deal doesn't work for me, the deal doesn't work for me. They move it on to the next investor and so be it. But I think, what's happened in the last year plus is that I've developed some really good wholesale connections, and it's because of the fact that they see that I'm buying a lot of property. So they proactively come to me and send me properties first before they send it out to the rest of their investor list, because they know I'm a solid buyer that, if I say I'm going to buy something, I always follow through. I don't go under contract and back out. I make these, when I say I'm ready to move forward on something, I'm serious about it. I've already walked the property. I have an idea of what my budget is in my head. I already have my financing in place and I'm good to go.
The wholesalers that are sending you properties that are off market, to your point, which I guess I would have thought that would be something that's common, right? I mean, you're going to go out and use the internet and find the property yourself. But aside from now, the relationships that you've built and these wholesalers are coming to you, is it suggested that you try to get involved in like Facebook groups where there are investing groups where those wholesalers will sit there, or try to find, third-party websites where essentially these houses are available that are listed and then they're attached to a wholesaler and start trying to build that relationship with the wholesaler that way? Or how did you do it in the very beginning, when you kind of moved into that space for finding avenues to identify these properties aside from just on market?
So, when I first started getting into the flipping game, there's all sorts of different avenues for meeting the wholesalers. They do investor meetups all the time, which will be like, monthly, essentially like networking events where you can go and you can meet a lot of other agents, a lot of investors, a lot of wholesalers in particular, and get on their lists. Once you do that, it's really a whole lot of trial and error for figuring out the ones that you do want to work with and the ones you don't want to work with. Again, a lot of the ones that are sending me properties that are on the market already, and they're showing me a quote unquote discounted price for maybe $50,000 under the listing price on a $1.8 million property. I was like, that doesn't really do anything for me. I could have gone and negotiated that myself and essentially made the commission on it as well. And that's one of the advantages I have as both an agent and the buyer in a lot of these scenarios when I'm purchasing stuff on market, is that I can kind of factor in getting the commission back into what my overall potential profit could be.
Yeah. Yep. That makes perfect sense. Okay. So tell us now, you've taken a look at a few properties, what's the first thing you do before you go out with your contractor to have them walk the property? Are you doing that at the same time? So if someone sent you this property, and are you just initially looking at, well, I'm only going to buy things that are, 3-bed, 2-bath, or I need it to have a certain size lot? Are there certain things on your checklist, on your list that you have to check before you even consider what the potential, return on investment would be?
Yeah, first and foremost, when I get a property sent to me, it depends on who's sending it, first of all. But I always, a lot of times I'll send it in an investment packet, more or less, which says like, here's the subject property. Here are the comps for what it could sell for after repair value. And they'll even put a little budget in for what they think the repairs would cost, which I never trust because it's always lower. Obviously, they're trying to make a sale.
Yeah.
So you need to do those numbers yourself. But the first thing I do is I run my own comps to make sure that, again, they're going to cherry pick the best ones to make it look like the best deal possible. If my numbers match up with what they provided, which is generally, again, depending on the person sending it to me, can be pretty close. Then the next step from that would be setting up an actual showing to go and view the property. And a lot of times, 90% of the time, I do schedule it to have my contractor come with me.
Okay. So then when you go actually walk the property, then are there certain things that you're looking out for, knowing that essentially you're going to be, taking this pretty much to the ground and rebuilding the property? Are there specific things where there's a no-no? So for example, like maybe the property has like major foundation issues. Are you staying away from that? Or, keep in mind too that Brad doesn't, he's not dealing with properties that have a basement, so we don't have to, if depending on where you're purchasing, there's other nuances that you want to be aware of. Like, does it need a brand new deck? That could be 40, 50, 60 grand. But in Brad's space, it's typically, there's no basement. So he's looking for other things. And what would those other things potentially be where, from just experience, or you've gotten bids before where you're like, it's going to cost so much money that it's going to eat up all my profit margin and I need to stay away from this property, or I have to get this thing for like literally pennies on the dollars to make it worthwhile?
Yeah, interestingly enough, I haven't ran into a property that I've gone after with major foundation issues. So that is probably one of the bigger issues that you could potentially come up on, and something that would give me some pause if it was major foundation issues. That being said, cracks in the foundation, it needs to be strapped, it needs to be reinforced a little bit. That is something that the traditional buyer will hear foundation and get scared away like very quickly. Probably one of the main causes for escrows canceling, things like that, is, oh, there was foundation issues, it's going to be too expensive. In reality, once you start, to your point, bringing the house down to the studs and kind of opening everything up, fixing the foundation is not really something that would really scare me by any means. Mm-hmm. I'd be more concerned with something that had, a ton of mold in it or something like that, water damage, things like that would take a little bit of remediation and things like that. But at this point, there's not really a ton that I walk into a house and say, this is, a deal breaker right here. Really, to me, the way that I kind of, and you've probably heard this a million times before, the profit is made on the buy side. So the only thing that you can make a mistake on is overpaying for the house to begin with. So walking the house, if you find that there's going to be more work than initially thought, then yeah, that's one thing you want to consider. And then you can always, adjust the price or adjust your offer based off of that. Mm-hmm. And that's why it is valuable to walk with your contractor unless you're very confident in your numbers.
Yeah. Okay. Would you say, is it a good rule of thumb if someone's not as experienced as you are to stay away from, adding square footage to a property? Like, can you still make a decent profit if you're, just bringing the property up to fair market value, but you're actually not adding, a bedroom or a bathroom? You're not actually adding additional square footage. And then you're dealing with all these additional permits and time. And, the things that you have to understand are, if you're using financing and you're not just paying all cash for this property, right? You've got like carry weight. So, if your rehabs, I think typically are taking, you do them very quick, but let's just say on average, you want to be in and out in 6 months, right? From the day you close, and then you already kind of have an idea of what you need to do. So you're pulling permits, you're getting materials ordered. So, before we kind of unpack all that stuff, what would you suggest? Like, do you, if you're a novice flipper and this may be like your first or second deal, what should you kind of stay away from so you don't get, in over your head and end up with losing a lot of money or maybe even losing the home?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I can definitely say when you're doing the bigger projects with the value add, whether that's adding square footage, whether that's converting a garage to an ADU or whatever that might be, it's definitely not for the faint of heart. I can tell you that a couple projects recently where I just, the holding cost alone is $10,000, $12,000 a month. And it's literally just sitting there waiting for permits to get approved, right? So every first of the month, I see my bank account and I'm like, oh, there's another 20 grand that is just kind of into the ether because you're sitting there. You're like, we're not able to work on the property while we're waiting for permits. It's obviously not livable, so you're not renting it out to anyone. It's just literally just pure money that's going down the drain at that time. But just you have to know in the back of your head that hopefully your numbers are correct and that you're going to make it all back and then some. It is something definitely to consider, the holding costs, especially when we're using hard money loans, which traditionally have higher rates than what you would get on a conventional loan. That is going to be one of your major costs outside of the labor and materials and things like that. Mm-hmm. So if it's me and this is my first or second flip, and depending what you have as far as your budget and your funds on the back end, I'd be targeting the homes that have the square footage already that you need. And then, the day that you close, you can either start your demo and you're able to do permits that are essentially just over the counter, which the majority of the time, if you're just doing a bathroom and kitchen remodel and remodeling the rest of the house, it's not requiring in-depth permits because you're not adding square footage. And then essentially the over-the-counter permits are issued same day. So you're not waiting on the city because depending on the municipality that you're in, permits for adding square footage can take anywhere from 3 to 6 months. Yeah.
Okay. That's a good point. So tell me a little bit, obviously you focused on the importance of bringing your contractor to this property, aside from just the fact that if it's safe to assume they're going to help you identify, this is the work that we would do to this house and this is the estimated price. What other sort of value has the contractors brought to you when you've gone out in the beginning of your, fix and flip career to help kind of navigate some of the unforeseen hurdles?
My contractors that I work with, that I partner very closely with, they're all very familiar with the whole permitting process, working with the city. They actually have, a relationship with the inspectors in the city if they've done enough business there. And I think to me that goes a long way again in making sure that we stay on target as far as your time, because the one thing that can really blow up a budget is having a bad contractor that can't pass inspections and you're just kind of sitting there again. Every time you don't pass an inspection, you have to fix whatever it is that the inspector called out and then reschedule the inspection and then hope that you pass that next time. Luckily, I've been in situations now with the contractors that I work with that very rarely, if ever, happens. But when it does, the job is essentially put on hold. And every time you lose a week or two, that's money, that's profit that's going away.
Yeah, no, you do have some pretty phenomenal contractors that you built relationships with in the beginning though, or even if I think you're kind of getting to the point too where you're building more of these contractor relationships because you have so many of these properties active at any given time that obviously you can, your contractor he could be phenomenal, but he can only work on so many houses at one time. So when you're going out and trying to vet a new contractor, is it like a good rule of thumb to have them provide you with examples of, recent closed transactions so you can see kind of some of the before and after work, whether that was just public photos or they've taken photos of the property, or what are some of the things and questions that you ask them to try to identify if you think they're going to be good before you've, given them a job. And then at that point, it's just up to them to perform and, meet the deadlines and do a good job. But, it's your very first one with them. So there's always going to be like that small amount of risk, no matter how much due diligence that you do.
To your point, photos are great, but to me, these photographers can make anything look good. So I really want to see something in person more so than anything else. And if we don't have that available, then I want to see, okay, you bought, whether or not it was their flip or they were just working for another investor like myself, this person bought this property at this point, at this price, this is how much you charge them to do the work. This is what it's sold for. So, okay, you can get a pretty good idea. If they did a nice job, the property probably performed as expected for that investor. And and they got the return that they wanted. So that's a good sign. But obviously for me, just because I've seen so many flips and seen so many remodels, I want to see it in person if at all possible, and then really get a feel for it from there. Other than that, they can tell you I can do it in this amount of time and this quickly and this quality, whatever it might be. You don't really know until you get into a deal with them. So a rule of thumb for me is when I'm kind of deciding whether or not to work with a new contractor or actually going to jump in and do it, the first project that I do with them is ideally something that's a little bit easier. So similar to what we were saying before, we close, we can start work the next day. We're doing over-the-counter permits, things like that. And it's ideally something I can be in and out of work-wise in 6 to 8 weeks.
You've done numerous of these projects, and now, it's, I've seen where, you're maybe doing 1 or 2 a year to now, on average, you could have 4, 5, 6 of these going at any given time. So you've made leaps and bounds within this space. And to your point, I think it's worth mentioning again that if you're new to this like fix and flip game, make sure you stay within a comfortable space, right? So you have the reserves that you need if something gets extended, or even if you're financing the renovations, through your hard money loan, you have the availability to do that. But it's important to remember that you have to kind of account for the what if. So I think it would be a good part, if we transition into talking about the actual renovation piece involved within the project. So you now at the level that you operate at, and worth mentioning that if you have a good investor friendly agent, maybe you may not have like a Brad Hansen where they're helping you to actually identify the property and what it's going to cost, and it's a very A to Z thing. He does offer that. So if you are trying to buy in the Los Angeles market, specifically South Bay area and surrounding areas, definitely get in touch with Brad. But if you don't have that luxury, let's say you've formed a relationship with a contractor, I think it would be important if you kind of break down what you can kind of expect to pay and cost, when you're doing these renovations. So have you broken it down to like, the cost per square foot of what paint costs, or a bathroom on average is going to cost this much, or a bedroom is this much? So then you can then determine, well, if I'm going to bring on this new contractor, if he's charging me 20, 30% more than the average cost, they're not going to be a good fit, because all this is cutting into your profit margin. So if you could kind of tell us, your headspace or what's worked for you as you've tried to determine, what the actual costs are associated with the rehab.
Yeah, so I think it goes in two different folds as far as how I work these deals out. I'll say first and foremost, when I'm getting a number from the contractor, it's never going to be exact on like an initial walkthrough, because you haven't really torn through the house yet. You can get a pretty good idea though, because you're just saying like, listen, I'm going to be doing everything. And you already know I'm doing a roof, I'm doing new air conditioning and a furnace and all that. So all my HVAC is going to be replaced. I'm doing a new electric panel, I'm doing all new plumbing. You kind of have those hard costs built in. A lot of times what can start to eat up your budget is finishes and things like that if you're just going really, really over the top. But a rule of thumb that I kind of play by right now, at least for our market here in Southern California, if we're doing a full extensive, remodel, kind of tearing through everything, minimally, we're looking at like $100 a foot to do that remodel. And that's just for the labor and like hard materials. So for example, a 2,000 square foot house, if it needs to be fully gutted and remodeled, assume $200,000 on your rehab budget. That's pretty simple. Now, if we're talking about needing to remove walls, adding beams, whatever that might be, that could, increase the cost as well. And then you also want to consider saving some budget in mind for landscaping when we're talking about single family homes that'll have, front yards, backyards, and things like that, because being in Southern California, having great outdoor space is also very important to us. So if you're looking to get the most, return possible, factor in a $10,000 to $20,000 budget for landscaping and rehab budget for that. Yeah, with my contractors though, I either, depending on what deal I have worked out with them, and it always just depends on where they're at, where I'm at. A lot of times I will partner with them where we're 50-50 partners on these deals. And instead of them, marking up their construction costs and putting their profit margin built into it, they're saying we're willing to take the risk with you because we've seen how you work and the results that you've shown in the past. So we're going to do it at our cost. They front all the costs for it. And then, when we go and sell the property, I sell it for free essentially at that point because we're partners on the deal, and we split the profit from there.
Okay.
So that's one way that I've been able to kind of keep down the costs and the out-of-pocket expenses as far as that goes. by actually partnering with these contractors. Obviously, I wouldn't partner with someone that I don't trust. They wouldn't partner with someone they don't trust. So building that kind of relationship is kind of like paramount.
Yeah, that's extremely vital from, on so many levels, which you've touched on a few of them. But I have to say too that, I've seen numerous properties that you've completed and brought up to fair market value. And the way that you design the property and the materials that you pick and the look and the feel, and, you obviously know your market. So being a real estate agent and fixing and flipping, I mean, definitely has so many advantages. But I'm curious, again, going back to the beginning, like earlier on, your first couple, did you have support from your contract? You went online and you looked at 10 or 20 houses that were selling and you're like, okay, this is how their bathroom looks. This is how their kitchen looks. Cabinets are still in. So when I do this property, I'm going to put white cabinets in. Did you have what sort of resources until you really built up to now how you just already know what you're going to put in there the second you walk in versus I have no idea what I want this sink to look like or how deep it's going to be or, can I get by with just a larger vanity mirror? If you could kind of break down, some of your trials and tribulations as you knocked out like the first one or two deals.
Yeah, and that's funny that you bring that up because I have so many people that are like, oh, it's so tough to, they're like, we just remodeled our house. It took us so long to decide on the tile, and then I ended up hating it, and yada, yada, yada. And I will say 100% the first few projects that I did, there was a lot of paralysis analysis where you'd go to the tile store and there's a million options and you're like, I have no idea what I'm going to pick. That gets easier and easier with every project that you do. You start to realize, do I want this to look amazing? Yes, absolutely. I've gotten great feedback in the past. So, I'm hoping that I'll continue to get that. But you also realize at the end of the day, the idea is to sell the property. And if it's not something that you absolutely love by the end of it, so be it. But that can always be changed. And more times than not, the sellers are going to love it. And if they don't, that's something that you can also fix as well. So just kind of trusting yourself and your sense of style and taste and just kind of knowing what's popular in the market that is generally a crowd pleaser. It gets easier and easier, but there are, a ton of decisions that have to be made and ideally a shorter period of time. You just also have to know that no matter what you do end up going with, it can always be changed. It can always be fixed, but just kind of trust your gut to a degree.
Yeah, that's right. And you don't have to answer this, but I'd be curious, on some of these projects that you completed, have you ever ran into a situation where, you're selling the property and maybe you're actually at your own open house and then you've gotten feedback, from potential buyers coming in and they kind of all focused on the same thing. And that was one thing you're like, okay, I'm going to make sure I change that the next time I do one of these. Has there ever been like a common theme on one specific thing versus, it could have been materials or the way you chose to do, the layout? Because you've changed things around in a house, right? I mean, you've opened up floor plans. Like, I've walked properties with you before, like, I'm in awe because you're like, I'm going to knock this wall down and then it's going to do this. And I'm trying to visualize that. And I think, that's one of the reasons why you've been so successful, because when you're buying a property, you want it done. It's hard to, typically, and again, I'm on the finance side, I'm not the real estate agent, but I feel from previous experience that, a lot of times if the house needs a little bit of TLC, that buyer just can't see that vision that the real estate agent can see. So they just want it done. And that's why you're so successful, because you've done all that work and now it's exactly what they wanted and you're getting top dollar for it and everybody wins, right? The client got a beautiful home and you made a good profit margin.
Yeah, a lot of times I do, as I'm the one remodeling the properties, I own the properties. I host the first weekend open houses. Hopefully that's the only weekend of open houses. But I do end up getting a lot of feedback from clients. And I will say, like, pat on the back, I usually get universally positive feedback with my design choices and things like that. Obviously, there's, people will walk a house and it's just like, oh, this won't work for us because of this. And generally, it's not something that was a poor design choice that I made. I know one house I did recently, and this is something that I ended up fixing after the fact or, while it was still on the market, had a nice backyard space, but the neighbors behind me had this dog that would literally, it was a 6-foot wall that was, separated the two houses. This dog that would jump up over the fence and like you could see its head popping over and like barking constantly. And, a bunch of people like, kind of laughed about the dog and things like that, but they were like, oh, it'd be nice if we had some more privacy there. So I ended up ripping out the grass along the back right there and planting these shrubs that went over the fence and will, eventually create even more privacy. But that's something I wish I had done prior to putting it on the market, because I knew the dog was there. I knew the dog would be barking. So that's one thing I've definitely learned, is that as you get closer and closer to the end of the project, the tendency for a lot of people that I see, and this is where you can say, you can see people cutting corners, is to tighten up the budget, whereas you really have to kind of push through and just realize, yeah, okay, it might be $5,000 or $10,000 more, but I need to do this to really, like I said, I'm doing everything. You really have to just keep going the extra mile. And that's what separates the good flips and the good properties from the ones that kind of just don't quite get there.
Okay. I think what I would like to end on, now that we've gone through things that we can do to identify the properties up front, the importance of having a good contractor, honestly, a partnership to your point, being mindful of the renovations and the costs associated and how big the project's going to be. So that essentially takes us to, what do these profit margins look like? So, and for those listening, what you have to understand too is, whatever these percentages are that Brad's going to convey, you also have to keep in mind though that Brad is a real estate agent. So when he buys a property, he's getting like the buyer's side agent fee on the transaction. And when he sells the property, he's getting the seller's side commission. So when you're doing this, if you're just a regular buyer and you're going to use, fix and flip financing money, you're going to have to account for at least 10% with commissions, loan fees, things like that. So budget that in addition to Brad's profit margin when he's trying to identify these properties. So with that said, knowing you can work with a smaller profit margin because you have other ways to get access to those funds, what do you typically look for, a comfortable profit margin, knowing that you're going to do like down to the studs, bring it up to fair market value, and then you are, for the most part, majority of your flips are definitely in like the, higher end, sale price, right? I mean, I don't know, the last four are over $2 million. So taking that into consideration, do you have kind of a number that you have to kind of stay within in order to make it worth your time, especially with carry weight and things of that nature?
Yeah, it's a great question. To your point, when I'm looking at on-market properties, I do have a competitive advantage from that standpoint because I can represent myself as the buyer's agent. I save a few percentage points on either side of the deal when we're talking about that. But what I've realized recently as I've increased my deal flow and the number of active projects that I have is that I don't really have time to go out, to my point earlier, and find these deals. And a lot of times I'm just having them sent to me by other agents that want to represent me, or these wholesalers where I'm not getting a piece of that deal. So really, I'm only saving money on the sell side at that point. It is, to a degree, a competitive advantage to have that license kind of in my back pocket. That being said, there's been this opportunity in the market right now. If we're looking at the lower end kind of flip, and again, I say this tongue in cheek, but $1 million in Southern California is kind of a lower end price point for flips, and there's a ton of competition for people that are looking to get in that space. So I've kind of started to target the, 2 million-ish price point, where it still needs a full rehab, full remodel, but the spreads are way, way, way bigger. So, the last couple projects I bought were around 1.7, 1.8. We're going to put anywhere from $300,000 to $400,000 into them and sell them for just under $3 million. So the spreads are massive there. Mm-hmm. And that opportunity to me is not going away anytime soon, just because of the state of the market. And it's an unfortunate truth, the economy is kind of split right now. There's the haves and the have-nots. But the $3 million buyers still exist. They just don't want to buy the $2 million fixer and do all the work themselves. They'd rather see a guy like me buy it, do all the work, and then they pay that market value for it. So I am targeting something that's, minimally got $300,000 to $400,000 in profit in it.
Okay. Yeah. With that said, do you feel like we're kind of moving into like a stagnant market in a sense that, we've had more inventory than we've ever had, even though it's low, but anybody who's successful can make money in a down market and an up market. But I think it's important to understand like the market that you're in. So if we are moving into that market where we're not going to see as much appreciation year over year, in some regard, and this is where I'm curious what your thoughts are, it's almost a better time, because if you're working in that kind of space, you kind of know what you're going to expect when it's done. So it's easier to identify where your profit margin is before you go into that transaction. Do you find like that market's helpful in that regard? Because I've seen you in markets where, by the time the work is done and it's kind of in that peak time and there's like that 10, 20% increase in sale price from what you maybe originally anticipated. And then you knocked it out of the park, right? So, and I don't know exactly what's going on in your head, but I'm just kind of like on the outside looking in on some of the transactions that you've previously closed. So I would be curious to kind of what you think this market's going to bring to you as we move into the new year as far as the fix and flip space is concerned.
I haven't been in this real estate and in the fix and flip space forever. I think this is kind of like a golden age right now, a prime opportunity to pick up these deals if you're willing to take the elevated risks that I am. Because of the fact that, interest rates are still on the higher side, we haven't seen a huge decrease in property value, if anything at all. I look back to, the crazy COVID times, and I think it would be virtually impossible to get the deals that I'm getting right now because people were still so willing to take on properties that needed a ton of work because they had the 3% interest rates and they would just figure it out. So from the standpoint where buyers are at right now, where they're a lot pickier, to me, it creates so much more opportunity for potential flips because I can see houses, and I tell this to my clients all the time for, if I'm listing their house, buyers are going to pick apart your house based off of everything right now. They don't want to come in and lift a finger if they don't have to. So either do it all or be prepared to take a major price cut on what you might have expected your house to be worth.
Okay, so I think that is a great spot to end the episode. Brad, do you have any final thoughts or final words that you'd like to leave us?
Say, for anyone that's looking to get into the fix and flip game, it is something that can be very scary, and obviously it's risky if you don't know what you're doing. So aligning yourself with people like myself, with contractors that you trust or people that maybe I can connect you with, having relationships with the different hard money lenders and things like that to kind of make things a little bit easier is definitely the best way to go. It's not something I would say is, that you should go out alone and kind of just try to figure it out as you go, but it is something that can be very profitable for you if done right.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. So again, for anybody listening who wants to run numbers on the next deal, structure financing, or get connected with Brad for, on the ground support in the LA market, you can find all of his contact information in the description. And if you need financing for your next fix and flip, you can head over to scimortgage.com where you can get in touch with us. We have tons of tools and resources available to run your numbers on your next deal to make sure it's a winner before you make your offer on that property. Brad, truly a pleasure, brother. I really appreciate you stopping by, and thank you for sharing, some of your vast knowledge in this space. I personally am grateful for you. I consider you a good, dear friend and a colleague. So thank you for joining us today.
Likewise, Ryan. I appreciate the time, man.
All right, everybody. We'll see you on the next one.